shall we delve into here? I mean, I gotta, here's some weird shit. Like, I'm just going through shit, and, you're thinking about things that ran on 42nd Street and the like. Well, here's a good one. If I hold this whole thing up, you'll get it. The Dark, directed by a friend of mine, John Bud Cardos. And this was another one with a who's of character actors. I can even, read the bottom of this thing here. William Devane was the main star, but you had Kathy Lee Crosby, Richard Jekyll, Keenan Wynn, Casey Kasem, a bunch of people. You sort of wonder how 42nd Street was when you sort of drifted into the 80s. Well, as Roger Corman said when Jaws and Star Wars came out, they finally got it. The big studios were cranking out stuff that basically had once been the domain of the small studios. And the movies that kept returning to 42nd Street, like the Ted Michaels movies, the Andy Milligan movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, all those little quirky things were now available on home video cassette. So once they hit that, they really had no market on 42nd Street because anybody could just walk into Video Shack, rent it, go home and watch it. So after the success of Friday the 13th, which was put out by Paramount, we got inundated by all these fucking slasher movies. I mean, just a plethora of these, Maniac on the Rampage things like Mother's Day, Madman, and I guess, the one that sort of topped it all off, Maniac, the Bill Lustig, Joe Spinell collaboration, which showcased the talents of Gore Master Supreme, Tom Savini, which became the patron saint of all these gore hounds. I mean, he did other films like The Burning and things like that. But it seems like for every fucking holiday, you had a fucking slasher movie to go with it. My Bloody Valentine for Valentine's Day. You had Mother's Day. You had April Fool's Day. Oh, God, I'm trying to think of you got New Year's Evil, and it goes on and on. And, these things were, some were produced by smaller studios, picked up by major distributors. But, the audiences that were hitting 42nd Street back then were getting very jaded, and they needed something to, shock them into a shock to the system, so to speak. Because when you went and saw these slasher movies, they'd be yelling and screaming at the killer where the people were hiding. That's how jaded they had become. Well, in the late 70s, Italian imports were coming in, like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, the one that Ruggiero Deodato did that was originally Last Cannibal World, but then was changed to Carnivorous, and then again changed to, what the hell was The Last Survivor, a couple other title changes. So that and Man from Deep River by Umberto Lenzi were the first two cannibal films to pop up on the Deuce, which basically really fucked with people's heads. And then the other one was Dario Argento came out with a film called Suspiria, and the catchline was, I believe, the only thing more terrifying than the first 88 minutes of this film are the last 10. And this was another one that fucking shook people up because it opens up with some chick getting hung and her heart getting cut out and glass breaking and all kinds of other shit and barbed wire, maggots, witches' coven, all kinds of crazy shit. Plus this pulsing soundtrack by a new band called Goblin. Well, that was the start of the Italian invasion. The one that really kicked it into high gear was when Dawn of the Dead came out and they brought in Zombie, the Lucio Fulci Zombie. And there was posters of that rotting head with the worms coming out of the eye plastered anywhere you could fucking stick up a poster in New York with the logo, "We are coming to eat you, and if you enjoy Dawn of the Dead, you'll just eat up Zombie." And they handed out barf bags. And it was a relentless ad campaign which kept on going. And it opened the door for Fulci because the next one they brought in was his City of the Living Dead, which was brought in as Twilight of the Dead, and had an ad campaign really very similar to Dawn of the Dead. So that got yanked. It got re-released as Gates of Hell, and you know, how can you top a drill through the fucking head? A girl puking up her entire gastrointestinal system, a hanged priest, 22 pounds of maggots flying through the air. I mean, this was just, you know, gorehound's fucking heaven. And it didn't stop there, because other films were coming in, like Breakfast at the Manchester Morgue by George Grau. You also had, you know, The Blind Dead, which came in the 70s, which was another Euro import. Oh my God. And then, you know, the most relentless one and the most endearing title ever slapped on a 42nd Street marquee, Make Them Die Slowly, the retitled Cannibal Ferox by Umberto Lenzi. And this one basically stayed at the Liberty Theater for 10 weeks straight, paired with Demonoid. Then they'd switch it to The Love Butcher. Then it disappeared. Then it came back for another 3 weeks, paired with Savage Man, Savage Beast. Then it disappeared and came back for another couple weeks. Well, Terry Levine of Aquarius Distributing had his office across the street and saw that the business this thing was doing. And also, don't forget, they tricked out the theater with fucking plywood cutout cannibals, blood dripping, head severed, gory stills, lobbies, all kinds of other shit. And they had a monitor running with the trailer 24/7. So Terry Levine decided he wanted to top that, so he picked up a film from Italy called Zombie Apocalypse, tacked on a pre-title sequence shot by Roy Frumkes. I believe it was something called Tales to Tear Your Heart Out, which had zombies walking around and stuff, and retitled it Dr. Butcher, M.D. And he was a mad, homicidal, rapist murderer who made house calls. Interestingly, the catchphrase on Make Them Die Slowly was, they raped and murdered his sister and girlfriend, and now it was his turn to make them die slowly. Well, the rape, which is a highly publicized thing on both posters, never happens in either film. Dr. Butcher had a bunch of really sick shit going on, like a zombie's head ground off on an outboard motor, bargain basement lobotomies with something that looked like a fucking pizza cutter, an eye gouged out and eaten in front of you, a realistic spring trap where the poor victim had his throat slashed and was fucking disemboweled on the scene. I mean, this was some really fucking twisted shit, and to promote it, he got a flatbed truck, had an operating room built on it, hired Gore Gazette editor Rick Sullivan to supervise the whole thing, and they had bloody girls with nurses' uniforms on it. They drive around the city, get busted by the cops, Terry would bail them out, and they start all over again. So that was how you sold a fucking movie back then. But it never stopped. I mean, you know, then we had, the one that, you know, people said it bounced all around the deuce, but I only remember it playing at the Harris paired with the Dragon's Revenge or something like that, and that was Cannibal Holocaust. And so much has been said about that I really can't add to it. I mean, this was one of the films, it really flatlined audiences to the point where people were throwing up, women were crying. I mean, it was like just too fucking real. And I think it being too real was the reason it wasn't brought back again. I don't recall seeing it playing anywhere, you know, other than the 2 weeks there. It was supposed to run in Jersey. It was at the Wellmont. It ran in Montclair. It ran 2 days before it was yanked out because of the animal cruelty stuff. I know there was a huge revival. Grindhouse Releasing brought it back. It played at the Pioneer Two Boots Theater once. But, you know, now it's been completely restored on Blu-ray by that wonderful company, Grindhouse Releasing. Other films were, you know, like I said, Italians were big copycats, so they had like this other film called Contamination, which they changed to Alien Contamination, which had a boatload of these big green watermelon-looking eggs that if you touched them, they exploded, sprayed acid on you, and you exploded in wonderful color with guts and shit ripped all over the place. The whole thing was it was some aborted mission to Mars, and something came back, and there was a Cyclops-like creature that ate a guy, and total weirdness. But that was another gory mess. And of course, you know, you had the Italian giallos, you know, New York City Ripper by Fulci. You know, other films, you know, that, you know, featured really grotesque murders and things like that. Trying to think of some other cool shit they did up there. You had Burial Ground, where number one, that really didn't hang around too long because the fucking thing was really shot too dark. And even the Vestron video cassette was dark. And this had zombies that basically could pick up fucking things and kill you with them. Some kind of desecrate a burial ground, wake up the fucking dead. People go to a chateau to party and wind up getting killed. I think the high point of it is this kid, really not a kid, really a really small fucking guy named Peter Bark, bites off his mother's nipple. That was like one of the high points of the whole thing. Rogerio Deodato came back with this other film, Cut and Run, which was released by New World, which was a horribly gory mess, which supposedly was going to be Cannibal Holocaust 2, and Richard Lynch and Michael Berryman were in it. Basically the one released by New World made very little sense because a lot of it was taken out. It was a lot of drug smuggling and some really fucking horrible murders, including disembowelments and John Steiner getting ripped completely in half. Really strange, fucked up shit, which really didn't do too well in the theaters. But again, that was available on Blu-ray. But after picking up the Blu-ray that it's on, you're better off if you can find the old Anchor Bay or Blue Underground DVD because it's a lot clearer and the scenes are a lot better. Trying to think, there was a lot more. Like I said, this drifted up until pretty much to the decline of the end of 42nd Street. I mean, there were also Bruno Mattei's Women's Prison Massacre and Violence in a Women's Prison, which really raised the ante on women in prison films in general, with starring the Black Emmanuel, Laura Gemser, that was in Women's Prison Massacre, which I did the liner notes on when it was first released on DVD. And this one's really rude shit with male prisoners breaking out, taking over the women's prison, a chick putting a razor blade on a cork and putting it in her pussy, so when she's raped it cuts his dick in half. A really fucking nasty bout of Russian roulette, where a bunch of brains hits a guy in the side of the face. Just crazy shit. I mean, the Italian stuff was really over the top and really took it to the extreme. But, we had all these cannibal and zombie films, but one of them, the cannibal films, was actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. It was Antonio Margheriti, and this was another one. It was called Cannibal Apocalypse, but was released as Cannibals in the Streets or Invasion of the Flesh Hunters. And it was about Vietnam vets that are infected with the cannibal virus, and one of them is John Saxon, the other one is Giovanni Ribisi, otherwise known as John Morgan. And it opens up with them being they're in a pit in prison, in this Viet Cong prison, and a burned Viet Cong falls in there with them. They start eating her, and then when John Saxon goes to pull them out, one of them bites his arm. The other soldier is Tony King. They infect the nurse and basically go on a fucking rampage, and until this was released on DVD, you couldn't find a coherent, uncut version of it because there was a mechanic who gets filleted by a muffler saw. The infected nurse rips out her boyfriend's tongue. One of the key scenes is Giovanni Ribisi's character is climbing up a grating through a sewer system, and he gets shotgunned from behind. There's a huge fucking hole blown in him, and the camera pans on it, and you see people running in the background. So yeah, that's another one, and they sort of left it wide open, and that's supposed to get the Blu-ray treatment pretty soon. There was another one that fucking escapes me, and this one bounced around because it was a 70s film that I actually saw on a triple bill with The Street Fighter and Return of the Street Fighter. It was Mountain of the Cannibal God, or Slave of the Cannibal God was the title I had seen it under. And this was another one because it had some big name stars like Ursula Andress and Stacy Keach in it. And it was about Ursula Andress's husband is missing on the Isle of Roca. And they have to go to the Isle of Roca, and Stacy Keach is someone who was trapped with the cannibals on that island and has to guide them back. And there's a whole bunch of weird shit going on because there's, I guess, uranium there, and they find her husband after trials and tribulations of being in the jungle with fucking animals that would never be living on an island in the first place. They find him like covered with all kinds. He's a putrescent corpse with the fucking Geiger counter stuck in his heart. And for some reason, they undress and paint Ursula white. And then again, you know, they undressed and painted Bo Derek white and Tarzan. So now I'm wondering if they actually undressed Linda Evans at one point and painted her white, because it seems to be a prerequisite with all John Derek's wives that they get stripped naked and painted white. But I digress. This had some nasty cannibalism scenes, including the traditional whacked-off penis, and a fucking really nasty midget cannibal who gets his comeuppance by getting his skull caved in and his brains hanging out. And, you know, there's another thing about this film that pissed me off, because this was done by, I'm trying to think, Sergio Martino, who really does, you know, giallos and adventure stuff and shoot-em-ups. And they did a thing where a fucking reticulated python ate a fucking, I don't know what, some kind of monkey that they were bringing with them. And they said that the python was following at a respectable distance. No, the python was following you because you had a fucking monkey and it was hungry. And they claim that they didn't do this on purpose. But yeah, they staked the fucking monkey out and the fucking python ate it. It's fucking nasty to look at. But, you know, that's the way these films were. They all claim that, you know, the animal shit was put in at the bequest of the producers after the film was finished. But we all know that's fucking bullshit. So, that, my friends, was the most extreme stuff that actually was fitting that it played toward the very end of 42nd Street. After that, it all pretty much folded up. And people always ask me, well, when you talk about these films, you never mention this scene or that scene. And I said, that's because those fucking scenes have been taken out before we saw the movie. I mean, you know, a lot of stuff was censored, cut down, trimmed up, but a lot of stuff was just taken out to make it fit in a 90-minute time slot. Good example is Day of Anger, the spaghetti western that had like 20 minutes lopped out of it so it could fit into a 90-minute time slot. So a lot of more extreme scenes that, you know, you're lucky to see on DVD. We didn't get that because they were already lopped out. So that's the story. So this is 42nd Street Pete saying one thing for sure, my friends and fans: stay safe and don't get sick. We'll see you on the flip side. Here's my dog. What do you want to go out?